Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina, I'm the host, and my friend here, my guest, is Brian DeBonville. Hi.
Hi.
Nice to have you here. So you are one of those rare people who've been knitting all your life, basically.
Yeah, I think going on 35 years now.
So how did it happen?
The shorter version of the story is that my grandparents used to pick me up from preschool, and my grandma only had dolls to play with at her house. And so she would actually make these elaborate dolls from scratch for neighborhood kids, and she would dress them and make them wardrobes. So she started saying, okay, pick out the fabric for this skirt, pick out the yarn that I'm going to use to crochet or knit the dress with. And it kind of went from there and hasn't stopped since.
So did you start with crocheting or knitting, like yourself?
I actually started with crocheting because I think as a little kid, it was easier to handle that one hook.
Right.
And then I remember I could not cast on to save my life. So I would do a crochet chain and then slide the needles through the crochet chain.
Right.
And I cast it on that way for a really long time.
I actually was just interviewing another designer, Naama Aidu, and she's both crocheter and knitter. And until now, she's like, every time I need it, I just grab my crochet hook and I do the cast on and cast off. It's just much easier.
Yeah.
So it's not an unusual thing to do, basically. So like when you look at yourself now, do you say that you are a knitter or you are a crocheter or you are like a fiber artist? Where do you see yourself mostly?
Oof. Knitter leaning towards fiber artist, I would say. I just got talked into working on a project that I'm launching next year where there's going to be a knit and a crochet piece every season. And me and another designer are trading off who knits, who crochets each season. So that'll be really interesting to see what I come up with.
So let's talk about your designing, basically. Like, when did you started designing?
From like really basic stuff of picking out the yarn that I'm going to use, being attracted to a certain color, or actually sitting down and writing out a pattern. I'd say being more specific about it, having a sketchbook, doing swatches, that really all started just a couple of years ago.
Well, what's design to you? Like in your mind, what do you consider your original design?
That's a really interesting question, simply because everyone that I've ever talked to has told me that everything I've ever made has been just about my own design, unless I'm following a specific pattern for something, which is rare. So I guess it's most of the things that I make, because to a knitter, some of the things that I make are really, really simple. Right. But to somebody who doesn't knit, they're like, oh my God, you know, how did you do that? That's like super crazy. I could never do that. So I guess it kind of depends on the audience, but for myself, I guess everything that I make, I design to some degree.
You started also teaching, right, at some point?
I have taught classes before. The pandemic kind of killed that. And I tried to do some Zoom classes pretty early on. I just sent out a ton of yarn and knitting needles to people, whoever asked for them, basically. But no one wanted to sign on for another Zoom meeting at that point. But yes, in the past, I've taught classes, and at some point, I'm sure I'll teach again. I'm actually planning a workshop with Los Angeles Trade Tech, where I'm going to school right now.
Right. Well, what did you like about teaching? Like, why did you decide to get into teaching?
Couple of things, but like super short answer, money. People will pay for knitting lessons. But it's really, really incredible to see someone come in there and be like, I can't do this. There's absolutely, this is crazy. Knitting is too hard. And to watch them get it right in front of you and to know that you helped with that process is one of the more rewarding, it's one of the most rewarding things that I can do.
So talking of money, right?
Yeah.
At some point you decided to start selling your stuff. Like how old were you when you decided to do that? Like, is that more recent thing or were you selling as a kid?
I made my first sale for a crocheted backpack in the 8th grade for $10.
How much was the materials for that?
Definitely, probably more expensive, but I think it was maybe yarn from Joann's or something. And I was so excited because Prada or Miu Miu had just come out with like the trendy 90s backpack, like mini backpack. But like as more of a business, I've been selling for the last 12 years at craft shows and actually spent about 4 hours today working on my website. So.
Well, do you remember your first like craft show stuff?
I do.
How did that go?
So back in 2009, had a ton of like really good big life changes and realized that I hadn't done anything creative in a while, in a couple of years, no knitting, no sketching. And I kept seeing this American Apparel jersey scarf and it had a seam in it. And it was this infinity scarf that everyone was wearing. Guys were wearing it, girls were wearing it, old people, like every age range. And the seam drove me insane. So I thought maybe I can make it without a seam, knit somehow. So I figured that out. And all of a sudden I had like 60 pieces at the foot of my bed. And I had no idea what I was going to do with them. And someone suggested, well, why don't we do a trunk show? And I was like, oh, what's a trunk show? And this woman was like, well, we'll have it at this restaurant. I can make the cocktails. You can set up in the dining room in the back when it's like after hours. And we just invite people to come have drinks and like look at your knitwear and buy it. And I sold all 60 pieces in one night. And I think at the time, I was basically 3 months rent in San Francisco rent in 2009. So it was a good chunk of change for me.
So
and
talk about pricing, because like a lot of artists who sell their stuff have issue with pricing their work, right? Because it seems like it's something you can do and the grandmother next door might be able to do and a few other people can do. So you start questioning your worth and you start saying, you know, like somebody can go to Target and buy a hat for $7. Why would I charge that much money? Talk about your thought process with the pricing.
Well, there's a lot of things about pricing for someone like me or anyone making what they're selling that makes it really confusing, because one, it's this thing that I love to do. I have all these emotional ties to it, but then I'm also trying to jump in on the business end and make a business of it. And I don't know anyone that's been terribly successful at a business that is able to separate the business and emotion from it. So when someone comes up to my booth and looks at something and says, oh, that's $120 for a beanie, or that's too much, I would be heartbroken. And years ago, my pricing was way off. It was way too low. I'm a little bit better at it today, but ultimately I know there's only certain things that I can make to sell or to put in a store somewhere that I might have to do wholesale for, which if people that are watching don't know is really half the retail price, roughly.
Right.
It's still really hard to price out work because, for instance, I make cowls and scarves for $80 to about $240. Haven't sold a ton of those in a year and a half, but people will buy a $40 baby beanie, or they'll buy a $300 or $400 blanket. There's no there's no sort of like middle ground. So it's also trying to figure out the price that the market will bear. And sometimes if my stuff isn't selling, it's because I'm not in front of the right group of people. If I do one show and I don't sell anything, that doesn't necessarily mean that the stuff that I'm making is ugly or poorly designed or, whatever I might think. It just might mean I'm not in front of the right people.
Well, is it not for the right people, or you question your ability to predict what's popular in the market?
Well, and that's a really good question too, because I struggle between, I go into a yarn store or I see a color card from a mill, and I'm like, oh, that color, I love that color, give me all of it. Without sort of thinking or planning ahead, what am I going to make with this? And if I really want to be in business for myself, I have to have kind of a plan for the following year. Like I started building a marketing calendar. So I know that in March of next year, I need to have a bunch of black and orange giants pieces ready for people in San Francisco. And, little things like that. Part of the reason I think stuff hasn't sold for me before is because I didn't have that business mindset. I didn't think about, the events that were coming up or take a look at the weather. And I'm still, because I'm mostly on the West Coast between LA and San Francisco, I'm still surprised about all of my biggest sales come from people that are visiting San Francisco or LA that are from back east, and they're like, oh, I know it's going to get cold, give me all the scarves you have.
Right. Well, does it frustrate you as an artist, right? Because there is two parts to you. You are a businessman who's trying to make a living out of it, but you're also a fiber artist. So as a fiber artist, does it frustrate you that you have to work for what's in demand and not what comes to your mind necessarily?
Sometimes. I think sometimes I was more frustrated early on because I didn't understand how retail worked and how business worked, and just sort of customers' buying habits. But again, it just goes back to that thing of, if I want to be in business for myself, I have to have sort of a clearly defined path and a set of goals. For instance, today I'm working on these little Pixie baby beanies that I've been making, something kind of like this.
That's adorable.
And I've sold a couple hundred in the last few months, I think. I know that that's what's going to sell, but I'm sitting in my studio. There's boxes of yarn to my left, boxes to my right. And I'm like, oh, I have all these tapestry ideas and I want to make these throws, but that has to get pushed aside until January. I need to make more of those beanies.
Right.
So it's sort of having that discipline too, I think.
Well, I have a friend who is this is what she does also. She goes to the fairs and markets, and she sells, she would knit for a few months and then go to a fair and sell all her stuff there, like headbands, hats, shawls, and whatever. And so she would go to Salvation Army or some secondhand store, buy cheaper yarn or find some yarn on sale in some big box stores to keep the cost low, because she's I can't sell a beanie for $120. I can sell it for $40, so I need material that's going to cost me $5, right? Do you feel like you need to compromise on the quality of yarn that you're buying to make the price reasonable for the consumer?
No, And there's ways, and I'm learning ways around that too. I have a business license, I buy wholesale. I can still do things in merino wool. I actually just found a whole bunch of cashmere from a mill in Italy for just so inexpensive. So there's ways around all of that. And the merino wool that I order, I typically order it undyed. So I just dye it if somebody wants a specific color or I need a specific color. And then in terms of acrylic, I find that the customer or the end user either doesn't necessarily care, especially if it's for a kid's piece or like a kid's beanie.
Right.
They don't care, or they're buying one of my pieces because of the design elements in it. It doesn't matter what the materials are.
Do you get bored knitting the same thing over and over again? Do you ever like wish that nobody would buy those baby beanies anymore and would buy something new that you just came up with?
Yes and no, I think. But that's why I usually have like 6 or 7 projects going at a time. And so I have a studio space in San Francisco separate from my apartment. And, I know when I go into the studio every day, I have X amount of homework or classes to do. And then I have a specific amount of time to make X amount of baby beanies. When I go home, if I still want to think about knitting or do any knitting, I can bring home some yarn and work on like my special project there. Or I try to carve out a little bit of time each week to just try something new or try a new technique.
Right. Well, is the reason you have a studio so that like in your mind you separate business from home?
And yeah, that's definitely one of the reasons, but let's see here. I guess, so all the way back at the start of the pandemic, I was actually running a restaurant in San Francisco, but living in Los Angeles, long story there. And the restaurant shut down. And I think in those first 6 months, no one knew what was happening. No one knew what was going on, but it was clear to me that I wasn't ever going back into a restaurant again to work. So the next best thing was to do school. And with this semester, I think about 2 months ago now, I was going to have a sewing machine set up. I'm doing the fashion design degree program at LA Trade Tech. And I just needed more space, and we have a very tiny 1-bedroom apartment. So kind of out of practicality,
Right.
I got the space, but it has been really, really helpful to have me separate. And I can't stress how important that is to have those two things separate.
How did COVID affect your business? Like besides the fact that the restaurant went out of business, but like just the knitting business?
Not as poorly as I thought it would. It really forced me to take a hard look at what I was doing, how I was doing it, hand knitting everything. Because ultimately you can't have a sustainable business if I'm the only one making everything. And December, actually exactly a year ago, I had a bunch of these really great beanies that I had been making and no way to sell them. No one was doing any events. And I thought, okay, it's finally time to actually put stuff up on my website. And in terms of pricing for these things, it kind of came down to what would this beanie need to sell at so that when one sold and I had to take one to the post office to ship out, that it wouldn't make me resentful. And that price was $120 and I was terrified. I thought, oh my God, that's too much money. But they also take me about 5 days to make by hand. And I sold out of them. that in December. And so it just forced me to go online, which is something that I've been hesitant to do. And I think that overall it's actually really improved sort of my outlook on how I want to turn knitting into a business and just have it be more practical.
Right. I noticed that you were on Instagram before Instagram even existed, basically. Like you were there from the very beginning.
Oh, yeah, maybe, yeah.
What? Well, I think I saw posts in like 2013 and stuff, like where
Yeah.
half of the people didn't even know that Instagram was a thing. What does Instagram, what's the role of Instagram in your life?
Um, it's changed over the years. You've probably, if you went that deep, you probably saw some really embarrassing posts.
I thought they were cute.
Oh, good. But you know, my outlook on that now is that it's something, it's a way for me to get my work out there for people to see and to create a community and connect with other people. I mean, this is a perfect example.
Right.
You know, another really funny example too is I think about 3 or 4 years ago, I noticed an account that I was interacting with. I actually didn't even know if this person was a man or a woman, but I knew that they lived in Sacramento and I was going up there for a wedding. So I messaged them about yarn stores in Sacramento. You know, flash forward a couple of years and we're working on a big project with Lion Brand, the Traveling Afghan knit along, and it's Erika Presnall has organized the whole thing. She is Skeen and Sticks on Instagram. So it's really just about creating community and being able to showcase my work. The algorithm and the likes and all of that stuff causes really insane anxiety for me. But I think I got some really good advice about a year ago from a woman in LA who said, stick to a 4-post repeat. And what I do, let's see here. What I do now is it's a work in progress post, a video post, a finished product that's for sale that in a perfect world links to my website. And then the 4th post is going to be, again, in a perfect world, a photo of me wearing something that I've made, or maybe not, or a picture of somebody and something that I've made.
Do you think like putting yourself on Instagram helps you to develop your business or prevents some people to connect with you?
It helps people to connect, for sure. I used to hate pictures of myself. Doing something like this, I would not want to do. I don't want to hear my voice recorded. But really at the end of the day, a lot of people are buying my pieces because they connected with a piece of my story. They connected with, you know, some sort of design element that runs through a lot of my pieces. And they like maybe how I present myself on Instagram or on social media. Right. And I think that that's actually really, really important. I've done consulting for some small businesses about social media and just in general, when I'm at craft fairs, try and talk to other people about Instagram, where I get a lot of questions. And the first thing I tell them is you got to take more pictures of yourself. And people are like, oh no, that's never going to happen. I'm like, well, you know, I think it's important.
No, I agree, because I was talking to Pigeon Nest, she's on Instagram, and Dax, and she was saying how she thinks that people buy from her because of her personality, because she's open about like things that going in her life, and people feel like they know her, people feel like they want to support her.
Right.
So like if you just see a hat, you might not necessarily
Right.
pay attention to it. But if you see a guy holding a hat, you know, you're like, oh, let me see what it is about, you know. So it's
Exactly.
like, it's more likely to catch attention.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you get inspired by what you see on Instagram?
Sometimes, you know, once in a while, there's something that stops me in my tracks. And then I also have to stop and edit my comments because it's usually a lot of swearing. I'm like, oh my God. And then in that case too, if something I think is really incredible, I'll comment on the post itself, but I message the person as well. Because I think that that means a little bit more to the person. I know if someone did that for me, I would be like, oh, wow, like that's really sweet. I really appreciate that comment. No one else is seeing that comment, and they took the time to do that. So I do, there's a lot of noise on Pinterest. So it's hard to sort of see the stuff that I want to see, I guess. Pinterest is a really big tool for me.
Right. So you mentioned to me that you're working now on like blankets and throws and wall hangings. How did that happen? Like, how did you go from beanies to something like massive like that? What was the thought process?
Well, we can all blame Juan for that. For those of you not or who don't know who Juan is, he's a great knitter down in LA that I've worked with now for maybe a year or two. We've been connected for a few on Facebook, I think. I've always wanted to do larger pieces, and like for the first Christmas with my partner 6 years ago, I didn't have a lot of money. I was really nervous about like what gift I should give him. And then on top of that, I was meeting most of his family on Christmas Eve, and we were all unwrapping gifts together. So I was like, oh my God, this has to impress them too.
Right.
And I had this really simple knit and purl parallelogram pattern, stitch pattern. And I thought, oh, I'll make him a throw. And that one actually I somehow knit in 10 days. But I've always just wanted to do larger scale pieces. Every time I go into a store or see some sort of magazine pictures with like a living room setup, I've always thought that those are really great. And there's also, I've mentioned this a few times over the years, but the Bauhaus School had a textiles division that was primarily only women who tried to apply for the architecture division, but they were told they couldn't get in. And they did these insane weavings, like really incredible textures, really incredible color palettes. And seeing those made me want to use some of those colors to just do a couple of different throws and wall hangings. So that's kind of how it happened. And then you can see a couple of machines behind me. Learning how to use those definitely helped.
Right. So you said that you're in school now for the design.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like it changes you as a designer? Do you feel like it makes you a different person?
It has really helped rein in just like all the noise that's in my head, the sort of like ADD crazy, like let's do 10 projects at once. Oh, look at that color. I'm going to buy all that and then put it in the corner and, you know, do something with that later. But school and just even submitting homework assignments every few days has helped me sort of really segment out what I'm doing, help me manage my time better, and then help me plan ahead to figure out, okay, what's my design process? What's the design? What's the end use? How can I sell this after the fact? So I think it's really helped.
So when you're buying yarn,
Yeah.
do you always have like plan for it?
No. Actually, this yarn is a Brooklyn tweed, not query, but something close to that. And I was in Washington State a couple of months back, and I had 15 minutes to run into the local yarn store while my partner and friends were at the wine bar finishing up. And I walked in, and they had this shelf of this gorgeous, gorgeous color. And I looked at it and I said, "Can I take all of that and do you guys ship?" And everyone in the store stopped and they like gathered around. They were like, "Oh, wow, you seem so sure. Like, what are you making?" And I said, "I have no idea. I have no clue. I just really like that color." So that's how I used to design. And, once in a while I'll still do that, but ultimately it kind of has to start with a sketch now and some swatches, because I don't have time to sort of sit around and knit half a scarf and then rip it all out and then maybe knit a sweater.
Right. Well, you mentioned that the beanie can take you 5 days.
Right.
Is that because you do other things, or is that because you need to take a break? Is that like, what's the reason for that?
All of those things. If I knit it all at once, it could probably take me 2 days, but on size 2 or 3 needles, my hands, that's another thing. My hands in the last couple of years really, really have taken a beating. I have to give myself a break every couple of, like, I think 3 or 4 days at a time in between hand knitting stuff, even doing stuff on a machine. It's just making one beanie all the way through is too much on my hands.
So do you do some sort of like exercises, like a warm up, or like some sort of stretching exercises for your hands? Like any tips or tricks?
Oh my God, sweet tart cherry juice supplements. Again, thank you, Juan, for this. His business partner told me about them, and I thought that she was an absolute lunatic. I was like, what? Like, it makes like any inflammation go away, but actually, if you do some reading on it, there's a number of fruits that can do that, but it really, really helps. There was, I think, a 3-day period where I ran out, and my joints, specifically in my right hand, just felt like they were on fire for a few days and were just really sore.
I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, it's so weird. It really helps.
Right. So like you mentioned that you wanna be more mindful and like plan ahead. So what's your plan for next year?
Oof. Haven't gotten too far into that, but I will say, one, there's that project that I'm now just proposing to Lion Brand. So we'll see if that takes or not with the 1 crochet and 1 knit piece every season. And then also going for the really, really big shows. There's a 3-day gift show in Chicago what month are we in? This is November. I think it's the end of September every year. I just keep having people say, "Oh, you should try out for this show, or go apply to this show, or go talk to this store." And, for years, I either couldn't imagine myself scaling the business at all, or I was just fearful of, well, what if they say no? What if they don't like what I'm making? And I think my big goal for next year is to just say, like, I don't want to swear, but, make that thinking go away.
Right.
And just go for the things that I've been scared to do and see what happens. Because at the end of the day, what's the worst someone can say? No.
Yeah.
I'm still going to knit either way. So
talk about your support team.
Oh,
like who are your people? Who do you rely on, like in your
That
business
is
your like as for your for the feedback for all of that?
such a good question. I was thinking about a bunch of stuff today before this, and I was thinking about, for any sort of craft person or anyone that sells at fairs and does this, we all have a huge team of supporters behind us. And I have a couple of friends in San Francisco who, at the drop of a hat, can come and pick me up, and can load all of my show setup into their car, and they'll pick me up and drop me off. Because Ubers now with the pandemic have also been really tricky. They don't have bigger cars, or any, like, everyone on Facebook that I'm friends with, a lot of people have bought different things for me over the years. And then ultimately, my partner has been the biggest sort of support system. He was like, okay, like, if you want to make this a viable business, go back to school and like learn how to make it a real business then, instead of like just sort of doing a craft show here and there.
Right.
And I think my family too. And support comes in like all kinds of ways too. It's maybe reposting something that I've shared, or making sure that their friends come to me for Christmas presents and different things like that.
Right. Do you have like return buyers who like buy it all the time, stuff that you post?
I do. That's also forced me to think about different products and what new thing I can make, because a number of people that I know have way too many scarves for me. To the point where I was actually talking to a friend in San Diego the other day, and I was like, what scarf is that? What are you wearing? Like, do you mind wearing a scarf that I didn't make in front of me? That's rude. And she was like, oh no, this is the scarf that you made for me back in 2010. So I think a lot of people have a number of different pieces for me. And that also goes back to the thing about posting pictures of myself on social media. A lot of people buy from me because they know me, or they know me through social media, and they like whatever I'm displaying, and they want to buy into that.
Right. How does it feel when you see somebody wearing stuff that you made?
Really good. Typically I see people that I know wearing stuff that I've made, but there have been two occasions. Once when I was 22, actually on my 22nd birthday, I walked by this woman, and she had a poncho on, which was kind of unusual then. You didn't see ponchos in San Francisco. And as she got closer, something was catching the light, and it looked like there were sequins on it. And she got like to my left shoulder, and I looked and screamed, oh my God, did you buy that at this store? I made it. And we were almost standing in front of my apartment building at the time. And I was like, come up for a drink. Let's hang out. What are you doing? What's your name? And she was very sweet. And that was a big deal, because someone paid full retail for something and they have no idea who I am. They just like something that I made. Same thing with, I made this beanie, I call it the stone beanie, back in 2012. And I made them in a bunch of really bright colors. And I saw this woman from across a huge intersection in San Francisco. This was like 6:30 in the morning, I think. And I screamed from across the intersection, hey, I made that hat. And she wasn't having it. But it's always really incredible to see that and see people wearing and enjoying the work.
Well, have you ever had any negative experiences because you are a male knitter?
Sure, I guess. I've always been knitting and I've never tried to hide that. And it was a huge problem in elementary school. I went to a private religious school where my parents were called and they were asked to send me to school with toys appropriate for a boy. Um, and I also, had kids growing up that made fun of me, but I was just sort of like this is, I don't know what else to do, actually. And basketball seems kind of stupid. It's not, but that's not what I was into.
Right. Well, were your parents always like very supportive of you knitting?
Yeah, they were. And, from the get go, when I was looking at colleges a long time ago, they were like, yeah, do whatever you want. Go to fashion design school or, try it out. Because at that point, when I was younger, I would, I guess, yeah, I did so. When I was a kid, I would make my outfits to go out every Friday and Saturday night. And people would either buy the shirt off of my back or I would see the design, you know, 6 months later at some major fashion house. And I was like, oh, like I'm onto something.
Right.
There are a lot of times when I make things, and I think the very first person that you interviewed, I had notes on everything, but I don't know where they are on my desk. But he was talking about how he'll dye some yarn and he thinks that it's ugly, but somebody else is like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever seen. And that's a really important thing for me to remember, because a lot of the stuff that I make, I'm like, oh, this could be better, or I'm going to hide this and actually not put this out for sale. And that's the thing that someone zeroes in on and is like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. So I think my lens for like finished products or like what I'm capable of is really narrow.
Right.
And I need to try and sort of widen that.
Well, are you a perfectionist when it comes to your knitting? Like, do you, like, let's say you made the tiny mistake, will you unravel it and start again?
It depends on the piece and the fiber and if I can sort of hide it or not. Um, some beanies, a lot of scarves are pretty forgiving. But yes and no. So those $120 beanies, you know, knit on size 2 or 3 needles, then I soak them overnight. And then I put them in the dryer for 20 or 30 minutes to get them a tiny bit felted. This woman asked me to do a Pixie beanie, and I was like, what is that? You need to send me a picture. And she was like, oh, it's this thing with a point on top. And frankly, sorry, Lila, if you're watching, we're gonna watch this. But I was like, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Like, that sounds so gross. Like, what? I made this beanie for her, and I was like, oh, it's actually kind of cute. And this woman is adorable. She's super fashion forward, great hair, and took some cute photos with it. And I was like, okay, like that could be a thing. But again, that beanie took me 5 days to make, and I don't, that's too long. And I had some yarn laying around in like I think bright red. And I thought, oh, what if I made a smaller kids version in like size 6 needles? And so that ended up being something like this. And it's the only thing that sold in the last couple of months, that and blankets that I've been making.
Right.
So
Are you surprised by that? That like something you didn't even think gonna sell sold so well?
I mean, yes and no. I actually try and stay away from baby stuff because the sizing is so crazy. Because 3 to 6 months means nothing.
Right.
It's, I mean, every baby is a different shape, and babies' heads are freakishly large. So it's taken a lot of trial and error to sort of standardize the sizes that I'm doing, because I can't really sell them online without having a lot of fit issues until I fit them into the categories of newborn, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, and then going into the years, because that's the way that people buy kids' clothes.
Right.
So
do you sell the patterns as well?
I should. I'm working on, I've been saying this for months. I think I have the kids pattern just about written. I just need to go over it another time to make sure it looks good. And then I should publish it.
You should.
I should. I think I told someone it was supposed to be ready in August. Oops.
Right. So do you have like when you, because you're in design school, right? Do you see yourself going more into design part of it, or do you see yourself staying as a hand knitter?
I see a little bit of both. Design is really where more of the money is. But I don't ever see myself not knitting, not using my hands to make something at some point. And the really great thing about being in school for fashion design is that there are even a lot of homework assignments where I'm like, oh, I've already done that. And the way I have to submit homework now is, we're taking pictures of everything and loading them into PowerPoint presentations. So like a lot of homework I've already done without even realizing it. And so that's been great. That also tells me that I'm on the right path.
Right. Now looking back, right? So for 11 years or 12 years, you selling things.
Yeah.
What did you learn from that journey? And where do you see yourself? Like, can you predict where you're going to be in 12 years from now?
Oof. I think in the last 12 years, I've learned that pricing and product mix is really important, and online presence is really important. That if someone doesn't buy something of mine, that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person or I'm a terrible designer. It just means that that's not my customer. And they may be my customer in 6 months. So I think it's always also really important to be professional and not just not get too emotional about the whole process. And in 12 years, I think one of the reasons I'm going to school now is my ultimate goal is to have a studio, in the sense that I'm manufacturing things there. I can do small runs for other people or help them, teach them how to make a specific sweater or a design that they want. And then I can also have stores come in and shop the showroom part of my studio and say, give me 10 of these or 5 of these. Or, you can come in and go shopping. And then the last piece of that is that I can go in and out to different companies to freelance, to do design work for them. When I was younger, I had a lot more opinions about who I design and what I would design for, but I think the overall process is still really interesting to me. So if it's a really big company, great. If it's a smaller company, great.
Are there ever days when you're not knitting?
Yes, especially more recently with having like a completely separate studio space. I actually try and wrap up and leave everything at the studio on Friday night. And then, because I was also doing this thing for years where the night before a show, I'd be panic knitting. Like, I need to make this thing and this other thing, and I don't have enough merchandise and inventory. And if I'm at that point, like that's not a good sign. So
I mean, what's knitting for you? Is that anxiety-inducing thing, or is it meditative thing, or both?
It's actually a really good meditation practice to some degree, but it also helps me I've also learned, like in recent years too, that I have massive anxiety about all kinds of stuff, and it really helps to reduce my anxiety down to, okay, now I just have to focus on this one thing in front of me and finish this thing, and that's it.
I have this funny question. So,
yeah.
like, I don't consider myself a patient person in anything in life, but then I need Shetland lace, right? So people, whenever they see the lace that I need, the most common comment would be like, oh my God, I wish I had your patience. And it's funny to me because I feel like I have zero patience for anything or anyone. Like I'm constantly like very impatient. Like if you ask people who live with
Right.
me or who know me well, they wouldn't describe me as a very patient person, right? Where
Right.
do you fit in that? Are you a patient person because you need?
I think you and I are very similar in that way. I feel like I'm a very impatient person. Very, very impatient person. Give me instant gratification. Like I want what I want when I want it, but I wanted it yesterday. And it's so funny to look at like shelves and shelves of finished knit pieces that I've made. I'm not sure how that math adds up, but you know, here we are.
Well, is your boyfriend, is he, I mean, I know you said he's supportive, but there is like supportive in general, and then there is like all the time you actually spend knitting, right? Does he ever complain about like the amount of yarn you buy, or the amount of time you spend knitting, or the amount of time you spend in the studio? Like, is there any?
Sure. I mean, I would say, like, outside of knitting, any relationship takes work and communication. And I've always historically had a problem with boundaries with work. If it feels good and people are paying me money to do something, I'm just going to do more of that. And I've really had to work hard to sort of schedule my time and think about like how I use my time, and think about, like, my partner and I, we have a date night every week. It's usually a Wednesday or a Thursday. And then on the weekends, we can do a mix of things together or separately. But I also try and be really, really mindful that none of that stuff comes home. He's also thrilled that there's no yarn in the house anymore. He's so excited about that.
Do you ever try to teach him how to knit?
He's tried once or twice as kind of a joke, and I'm like, this is stressing me out too much. Like, just go cook dinner. Like, stop. Like, this is don't touch that, please. And his background, he's actually in e-commerce and has done retail buying for a very long time. So we actually argue a lot about e-commerce and my own business and how that goes. So the only time he gives me a hard time about yarn that I'm buying is, he's like, well, you know, what's that going to make the cost of goods for whatever you're making? So.
Right. Well, I can't wait to see what's happening with you in the next years, and it seems like it's going to be very exciting and interesting. So I'll be here to watch, and hopefully one day I'll get that Pixie beanie as well when you publish that pattern. So
yes,
I'll need that. So thank you so much for being my guest today. I really enjoyed our chat.
Thank you so much. It was really great to talk to you. It's an honor when anyone wants to talk to me about knitting and just what I do. So thank you.
Oh, no, thank you.